Chapter 1. Seraphina. The silk of my gown was so tight against my ribs that I had to calculate every breath. Shallow inhale, slow exhale, repeat. I stood next to Lucian Moretti and played the part I was sold to play. I was the ornament. I was the piece of art that signaled to the rest of the Chicago underworld that Lucian's empire was stable enough to possess beautiful, useless things. A heavy-set man with a scar running through his eyebrow leaned in close to shake Lucian's hand. He made a comment about the weather that was actually a code about a shipment of firearms coming in through the docks. Lucian nodded, his face an impenetrable mask of boredom and authority. I smiled. It was a practiced porcelain smile that didn't reach my eyes. For 6 months I had perfected this expression. I called it the blank canvas. It was the look of a woman who had no thoughts, no opinions, and absolutely no history. My father had scrubbed my past clean before the marriage contract was signed. Seraphina the street racer didn't exist. Seraphina the mechanic was dead. There was only Mrs. Moretti, the silent wife who looked good in diamonds. Lucian shifted beside me. He smelled of sandalwood and dangerous ambition. He was objectively the most beautiful thing in the room, with jet black hair that fell slightly over his forehead and a jawline that could cut glass. But he was cold. He was a glacier in a tuxedo. He turned to me, his dark eyes scanning my face for a second. "Do you need a drink, Seraphina?" His voice was polite. It was the tone you used with a distant relative or a child you didn't particularly like. "I am fine, Lucian. Thank you." My voice was soft, breathless, fake. He nodded once, satisfied that the furniture wasn't malfunctioning, and turned back to his business associate. I needed to get out of there. The heat in the ballroom was stifling. The smell of expensive lilies and desperation was making my stomach turn. I waited for a break in the conversation, for a moment where Lucian's attention was fully absorbed by the logistics of his criminal empire, and I stepped back. He didn't turn around. He didn't reach for my hand. I slipped through the crowd like a ghost. I was good at disappearing. It was the one skill from my old life that I was allowed to keep. I found the heavy velvet curtains covering the east balcony doors and pushed through them. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face. It was glorious. I walked to the stone railing and gripped it, letting the rough texture bite into my palms. I took a deep, real breath for the first time in hours. Below me, the estate grounds stretched out in perfect, manicured darkness. It was a cage. A very expensive, very beautiful cage. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the smell of burnt rubber and the scream of an engine redlining in third gear. I missed the vibration of a steering wheel in my hands. I missed the fear. The sound of the balcony door opening made me freeze. I didn't turn around. I stayed deep in the shadows of the alcove, hoping whoever it was would just smoke their cigarette and leave. Then I heard Lucian's voice. "Stop worrying, Matteo. The merger is solid." I stiffened. Matteo was his underboss, a man who looked at me like I was a liability waiting to happen. "I know the business is solid, Lucian. I am talking about the home front. You seem restless." There was a pause. I heard the distinct click of a lighter. "I am not restless," Lucian said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am bored." "Bored? You have the world at your feet. You have a fortress. You have a wife that half the city wants to steal." Lucian let out a sigh that sounded heavy with exhaustion. "Seraphina is not a wife, Matteo. She is a statue." My heart stopped beating for a second. "She is beautiful, yes," Lucian continued, his tone flat. "She is elegant. She is obedient, but being married to her is like living with a very expensive, very fragile lamp. I come home and she is there, shining quietly in the corner. I leave and she is there. She offers nothing. She challenges nothing. There is no fire." Matteo chuckled. Most men would kill for a quiet wife, boss. Most men are idiots, Lucian snapped. I feel like I am suffocating in polite silence. I want to know there is a pulse under that designer dress. I want a partner, not a prop. But I think I bought a lemon, Matteo. The lights are on, but nobody is home. The insult landed in the center of my chest like a bullet. A lamp. A lemon. Empty. The rage didn't come in a hot rush. It came cold. It started in my toes and worked its way up, turning my blood to ice water. I had spent 6 months suffocating myself to be the woman he supposedly wanted. I had bitten my tongue until it bled. I had let him think I was weak because I thought it would keep me safe. And he was bored. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was hollow. My grip on the stone railing tightened until my fingernails chipped against the granite. I looked down at my hands. These hands used to be covered in grease. These hands used to strip an engine block in under 3 hours. These hands used to hold the wheel steady at 140 miles an hour, while men like Lucian screamed for mercy. I was done. The fracture inside me was clean and total. Seraphina the statue crumbled into dust, and from the rubble something much darker stood up. I didn't stay to hear the rest of their conversation. I didn't want to hear Matteo tell him to get a mistress. I turned and slipped back through the curtains, moving silently. I didn't head back to the party. I walked straight toward the service corridor. I passed the coat check. I passed the kitchen where the staff was frantically plating desserts. I saw the head of security stationed near the back exit. It was empty. The guard was likely outside having a smoke break. On the desk sat the master transponder. It was a heavy black box with a single red button. It controlled the perimeter gates. Without it, the estate was a fortress. With it, the world was open. I didn't hesitate. I swiped the transponder and shoved it into my clutch. I kept walking until I reached the back door that led to the private garage. My feet were screaming in protest against the heels. I stopped in the hallway, leaned against the wall and unbuckled the straps. I kicked the shoes off. I left them right there in the middle of the hallway. Let Lucian find them. Let him wonder where his lamp went. I pulled a pair of foldable flats from my purse and slipped them on. They had thin rubber soles. Perfect for feeling the pedals. I pushed open the door to the garage. It was silent and vast, filled with millions of dollars of Italian engineering. But I ignored the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis. Those were cars for showing off. I walked to the back corner. Under a black dust cover sat the only car in Lucian's collection that mattered. I yanked the cover off. The 1969 Mustang Mach 1 sat there, black on black, aggressive and mean. It was a beast of a car. Lucian never drove it. He said it was too imprecise. He said it was a sledgehammer when he preferred a scalpel. I loved sledgehammers. I checked the door. Locked. I didn't have the keys. I didn't care. I pulled the decorative pin from my hair, letting my heavy curls fall around my face. I bent the metal against the door frame until it snapped into 2 distinct tools. I crouched by the lock. I worked the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway. I raked the second pin across the tumblers. I felt the feedback in my fingertips. It was the language I spoke best. Click, click, chunk. The lock turned. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The smell of old leather and gasoline hit me like a drug. It smelled like home. I leaned under the dash. This was child's play. I popped the ignition housing. I found the red wire and the ignition lid. I stripped them with my teeth, spitting the plastic casing onto the floor mat. My hands were steady. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation. Expensive lamps don't break the law, Lucian. I twisted the wires together. The dash lit up amber. I touched the starter wire to the cluster. The engine caught instantly. It didn't purr like the Ferraris. It roared, It barked to life with a deep, choppy idle that shook the entire frame of the car. It was the sound of violence. I sat up and gripped the wheel. I threw the transponder onto the passenger seat. I slammed the shifter into gear. I didn't ease out of the garage. I stomped on the gas pedal. The rear tires lit up, screaming against the polished concrete floor. Smoke filled the air instantly. The car fishtailed as it shot toward the open bay door, the rear end kicking out violently. I caught the slide with one hand on the wheel. I burst out into the cool night air. I saw the security guard drop his cigarette and reach for his radio. His face was a mask of pure shock. I didn't stop. I aimed the nose of the Mustang at the main driveway. I grabbed the transponder and held the button down. The massive iron gates at the end of the drive began to groan open. I pressed the pedal to the metal floor. The engine howled as the tachometer climbed. I flew past the ballroom windows. I hoped the glass rattled. I hoped Lucian spilled his drink. I shot through the gap in the gates before they were fully open, clipping the side mirror on the ironwork. Sparks showered the pavement. And then I was free. The open road stretched out in front of me. I shifted into third gear, letting the engine scream. I wasn't Seraphina the statue anymore. I wasn't Mrs. Moretti. I was Silenzio. And I was about to make a lot of noise.
Chapter 2. Lucian. The silence in the estate was usually something I paid good money for. I liked the quiet. I liked the order. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. I walked through the front door, ripping the silk bow tie from my collar and undoing the top button of my shirt. The gala had been a catastrophe of boredom, capped off by the distinct humiliation of my wife vanishing into thin air. I checked my watch. 1 a.m. I had spent the last 2 hours making excuses to the heads of the 5 families. She had a migraine. She was feeling faint. She went home to rest. They nodded, they smiled, and I saw the calculation in their eyes. A man who couldn't keep track of his wife was a man losing his grip. I tossed my jacket onto the entryway table. "Seraphina?" I called out. My voice echoed off the marble floors. No answer. I took the stairs 2 at a time, anger simmering low in my gut. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to know she was alive so I could go to sleep and forget this evening ever happened. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom. The bed was made perfectly, untouched. The curtains were drawn. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I walked into the walk-in closet. Her clothes were there. The rows of designer dresses I paid for. The shoes she wore to look tall enough to stand next to me. But there was a gap on the floor. Her heels. The ones she had worn tonight were missing, which meant she hadn't come back here to change. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. Kidnapping was always a threat. We lived in a fortress, but people had tried to take what was mine before. If someone had taken her from the gala... My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Russo, my head of security. "Boss," Russo's voice was tight, breathless. "We have a situation." "I know the house is empty, Russo. Where's my wife?" "It's not... We don't know where she is, boss, but we know where the car is." I frowned, walking back out into the hallway. "What car?" "The Mustang, the '69 Mach 1. I stopped dead at the top of the stairs. "Repeat that." "The Mustang is gone, Lucian. The garage log shows it exited the perimeter at 10:45 p.m. The transponder was used to open the gate." I hung up the phone without a word. I moved fast, descending the stairs and heading straight for the service corridor. I burst into the garage, my heart hammering a rhythm I didn't recognize. The garage was massive, a climate-controlled sanctuary for my collection. I scanned the rows. The Ferrari was there, the Bentley was there, but in the back corner, the spot was empty. The black dust cover lay crumpled on the floor like a dead body. I stared at the empty space, That car was a beast. It had a clutch heavy enough to break an ankle and no power steering. It wasn't a car you just drove. It was a car you wrestled. And Seraphina, my soft, quiet, delicate Seraphina, had somehow taken it? Russo came running in, from the side entrance, 2 other guards flanking him. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "How?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "How did it leave the garage, Russo? I have the only set of keys." The footage shows she hotwired it, boss." Russo swallowed hard. "She bypassed the ignition in under 40 seconds. I looked at him. I tried to process the words. Seraphina hotwiring a muscle car. It was like hearing that my toaster could do calculus. It didn't make sense. "Where is it?" I demanded. "The GPS tracker is active," Russo said, looking down at his tablet. "It's stationary. It's at the old docks." The docks. The illegal racing circuit. "Get the car," I ordered. Russo nodded frantically. "I'll bring the SUV around, the armored one." I narrowed my eyes. Why the hell would I take the SUV? It drives like a tank. Bring the Maserati sedan. I need speed. Russo hesitated. He actually stepped in front of me. "Boss, safety protocol. If she's been taken, or if this is a setup, the SUV is bulletproof. The suspension is reinforced. It's safer. You should take the SUV." He was insistent. Too insistent. "Russo," I stepped into his space, towering over him. "If my wife is at the docks, I am not rolling up in a tank to scare everyone off. I am going in low profile. Bring the sedan, now." He flinched, the color draining from his face. Yes, of course, boss." He scrambled to get the keys for the dark blue Maserati Ghibli. I paced the garage floor while the engine fired up. A lamp. That's what I had called her. I remembered the conversation on the balcony. I remembered the heavy, suffocating feeling of boredom that had plagued me for months. I had wanted a reaction. I had wanted fire. Apparently, I had started an inferno. Russo pulled the Maserati up. I didn't wait for him to open the door. I got into the driver's seat. "I'm driving," I said. "Stay here. Secure the perimeter." "But boss..." I slammed the door and peeled out of the garage. The drive to the docks usually took 30 minutes. I made it in 15. My mind was racing faster than the engine. Why the docks? Why the Mustang? Was she trying to sell it? Was she meeting a lover? The thought made my grip on the steering wheel tighten until the leather creaked. If she was meeting a man, I would kill him. I wouldn't make it quick. I would make it a lesson in what happens when you touch Lucian Moretti's property. But hot-wiring the car? That wasn't the move of a woman running to a lover. That was something else. I turned off the main highway and onto the cracked industrial roads leading to the water. The streetlights here were broken, leaving the road in patches of darkness and shadow. I could hear the distant sound of engines revving, the smell of burning rubber and unburnt fuel hanging in the air. I killed the headlights as I approached the gathering. It was a massive crowd. Hundreds of people, cars lined up in rows, music thumping from open trunks. This was the Underworld's playground. No cops came here. This was neutral ground for the adrenaline junkies of Chicago. I parked the Maserati in the shadows of a shipping container, far enough back to be unseen but close enough to watch. I got out, smoothing my suit jacket, feeling the weight of the gun in my shoulder holster. I walked toward the crowd, blending into the dark. And then I saw it. My Mustang. It was sitting at the start line, the black paint gleaming under the harsh floodlights they had rigged up. It looked menacing. It looked right at home. A bright yellow Porsche was lined up next to it, the driver revving his engine, showing off, making the exhaust pop and bang. The Mustang sat silent. It wasn't revving. It wasn't inching forward. It was perfectly still. I pushed through the edge of the crowd. Nobody noticed me. They were all focused on the cars. I looked at the driver of my car. I couldn't see a face. They were wearing a helmet, matte black, scratched up. It was my spare track helmet. I kept it in the trunk with the emergency roadside kit. The driver's hands were on the wheel at 10 and 2. They weren't fidgeting. They weren't looking at the crowd or the flashy Porsche next to them. The head was faced forward, locked on the stretch of tarmac ahead. The stillness was unnerving. I had seen amateur racers. They were twitchy. They checked their mirrors. They pumped the gas to keep the RPMs up because they were nervous about stalling. This driver was a statue. My breath hitched. A statue. The insult I had thrown on the balcony came back to me, but this time, the context was different. This wasn't the stillness of an empty room. This was the stillness of a predator before the strike. I knew that stance. I had heard stories from my associates in Naples, tales of a driver who never spoke, never showed a face, and never lost. They called him or her Silenzio, the ghost. I watched the official walk between the cars. She raised her arms, a red flag in her hand. The Porsche revved louder, the driver screaming something out the window. The Mustang remained silent, just a low, menacing rumble from the idol. The flag dropped. I expected the Mustang to stall. I expected the tires to spin uselessly, because the torque on that car was impossible to manage if you didn't know the clutch bite point. I was wrong. The Mustang didn't just move. It launched. It was a perfect launch. The front end lifted, the weight transferring to the rear tires instantly. There was a chirp of rubber, a puff of smoke, and then it was gone. It shot forward like a bullet leaving a chamber. It left the Porsche sitting there, choking on exhaust fumes. I stood there in the gravel, surrounded by screaming strangers, and I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. My wife wasn't in the car. She couldn't be. Seraphina didn't know how to drive a stick shift, let alone launch a muscle car with flawless traction control. And yet, I watched the taillights of my car disappear around the first bend, drifting the corner with a precision that was terrifyingly beautiful. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It wasn't anger anymore. The anger had evaporated the second that car launched. It was shock. And beneath the shock, something dark and hot uncurled in my gut. I watched the empty track where my car had just been, and for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't bored. I was captivated.
Chapter 3. Seraphina. The world inside the helmet was small, dark, and smelled like him. It was Lucian's spare track helmet. I had found it in the trunk, buried under the roadside emergency kit and a quart of oil. It was a matte black awry, scratched along the jawline from where he must have dropped it once. I pulled the strap tight under my chin. The padding pressed against my cheeks, squishing them slightly, but I didn't care. The smell was overwhelming. Cedar. Expensive cologne. And underneath that, the sharp chemical tang of high-octane fuel. It was the scent of Lucian Moretti, distilled and trapped in a confined space. It should have made me angry. I was stealing his car to escape him, yet here I was, literally wrapping my head in his scent. But it didn't make me angry. It grounded me. It blocked out the screaming crowd, the thumping bass of the stereos, and the cold wind coming off the lake. Inside the helmet, there was only the sound of my own breathing. Inhale, exhale. I looked to my left. The driver of the yellow Porsche was revving his engine again. He was a kid, maybe 25, with more money than skill. He leaned out his window, grinning at me, shouting something that was lost to the glass and the padding of my helmet. He pointed at his watch. He laughed. He thought he was racing a nobody. He thought he was racing some random guy who stole a nice car for a joyride. He didn't know he was racing a ghost. I didn't rev back. That was for amateurs. Revving heated the engine unnecessarily and wasted fuel. I kept the Mustang idling low, a deep rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the bucket seat and straight up my spine. My left foot hovered over the clutch. My right foot rested lightly on the gas. My hand was on the shifter, feeling the vibration of the transmission. I wasn't Seraphina anymore. The statue had shattered back at the estate. I was Silenzio, the girl from the streets of Naples who learned to drive in stolen Fiats before graduating to the big leagues. The girl who never spoke trash, never showed her face, and never lost. The track girl walked to the center of the lane. She was wearing barely anything despite the chill. She raised the red flag high above her head. The Porsche screamed, the engine whining at the red line. The driver was nervous. He was going to dump the clutch too hard. He was going to spin his tires. I narrowed my eyes. The world narrowed down to that red fabric. The flag dropped. I didn't think. My body took over. Left foot up. Right foot down, the dance of friction and torque. The Mustang launched. It was violent. The front end of the car lifted, the suspension groaning under the sudden transfer of weight. My head snapped back against the headrest. To my left, the Porsche tires shrieked, creating a cloud of white smoke. He was spinning. He was wasting power on showmanship. I was already gone. The raw power of the Mach 1 was intoxicating. It didn't have the computer-assisted traction control of modern supercars. It didn't have paddle shifters or stability management. It was just metal, rubber, and physics. If I made a mistake, the car would kill me. I loved it. I slammed the shifter into second gear. The tires chirped, a short, sharp bark of rubber biting into asphalt, and the car lunged forward again. The first turn was coming up fast. It was a hairpin left around a stack of rusted shipping containers. This was where the race was won or lost. The straightaway was for horsepower. The corners were for drivers. I didn't brake, not yet. I held the gas down, pushing the speedometer past 80. The shipping containers loomed large in the windshield, a wall of corrugated steel. Wait, now. I slammed on the brakes, shifting the weight of the car to the front tires. At the same time, I cranked the wheel left and ripped the handbrake for a split second to break the rear traction. The back of the Mustang swung out wide. It was a controlled slide, a drift. I countersteered, turning the wheel into the slide, and feathered the gas pedal. The car glided sideways around the corner, the rear bumper missing the steel container by inches. It felt like flying. It felt like dancing. Inside the helmet, it was silent. I couldn't hear the tires screaming. I couldn't hear the crowd gasping. I could only hear the blood rushing in my ears and the roar of the V8 engine responding to my command. I straightened the wheel as I exited the turn, the tires catching grip instantly. I floored it. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The Porsche was struggling. He had taken the corner too wide, terrified of hitting the containers. He was 3 car lengths back and fading fast. Adrenaline flooded my system. It was better than champagne. It was better than diamonds. This was power, real, tangible power that I controlled. Not Lucian, not my father. Me. I tore down the final straight away. The finish line was a pair of oil drums set on fire. I crossed the line doing 110. I didn't cheer. I didn't pump my fist. Silenzio didn't celebrate. I began the slow process of braking, downshifting through the gears to let the engine compression slow the heavy car. I turned the car around in a wide arc and drove back toward the starting line at a crawl. The crowd was swarming the track. They were banging on the hood, on the roof. They were screaming. I couldn't make out the words at first, but then the chant started to unify. Silenzio! Silenzio! Some of the older guys remembered. They remembered the legend. They recognized the driving style, the silence at the line, the aggressive drift, the absolute lack of showboating. I brought the car to a stop near the defeated Porsche. The driver was slamming his steering wheel in frustration. I put the car in neutral and pulled the handbrake. I didn't turn off the engine. I let it idle. Let it breathe. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was bruising my ribs. I felt high. I felt dizzy with it. For 6 months I had been invisible. Tonight I was the only thing anyone could see. I watched the crowd through the tinted visor of the helmet. They were pushing in, trying to get a look at the mystery driver. Then the sea of people parted. It wasn't a gentle separation. It was the kind of parting that happens when a shark enters a school of fish. People scrambled back, heads bowing, eyes averting. A man walked through the gap. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than most of the cars here. His tie was gone, his collar undone. He looked out of place in the grit and grime of the docks, like a panther walking through a landfill. Lucian. He stopped 10 feet from the car. The floodlights cast harsh shadows across his face. He didn't look like the bored, indifferent husband I had left on the balcony. He looked lethal. His dark eyes were locked on the car. He scanned the tires, the hood, the driver's side window. He wasn't looking at the damage. He was looking at me. He walked forward. He didn't rush. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. He reached the driver's door. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. The sudden noise of the crowd rushed in, the shouting, the engines, the music. Lucian stood in the open doorway, blocking out the rest of the world. He loomed over me, filling the frame. He smelled of the cold night air and fury. He grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, his fingers digging into the silk of my stolen gala gown, but he didn't hurt me. "Get out," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command that vibrated with low, dangerous intensity. I looked up at him through the visor. He couldn't see my face. He could only see his own reflection in the black plastic. I didn't move. I said, "Get out," he growled, leaning closer. "Who are you? Who taught you to drive my car like that?" He was confused. He was angry. But underneath it all, I saw it. The same thing I had felt on the track. He was fascinated. He was looking at the driver of this car with more intensity than he had ever looked at his wife. I felt a bitter smile curve my lips behind the padding. "You wanted a pulse, Lucian? You wanted fire?" I unbuckled the seatbelt. I turned my body toward him, swinging my legs out of the car. My ballet flats hit the gravel. I stood up. I was shorter than him, even without the heels, but I stood tall. The crowd went silent. They were waiting to see the face of the legend. Lucian was waiting to see the face of the thief. I reached up with both hands. I found the latch of the strap and undid it. I gripped the sides of the helmet. Lucian's eyes narrowed. He was studying my hands, my manicured, feminine hands. The realization was starting to dawn on him. I could see the confusion rippling through his expression. I lifted the helmet. It slid off with a soft suction sound. I shook my head, and my heavy, dark curls cascaded down, spilling over my bare shoulders and the bodice of my emerald gown. I took a deep breath of fresh air, filling my lungs. I looked up. Lucian froze. He stopped breathing. He stopped blinking. He stared at my face. He looked at my messy hair, my flushed cheeks, the smudge of grease that I knew was on my chin from the steering wheel. He looked at Seraphina. But for the first time in 6 months, he wasn't looking through me. He was seeing me. The silence stretched between us, heavier than the car, louder than the crowd. "Seraphina," he whispered. The word sounded like it had been punched out of his lungs. I tossed the helmet onto the passenger seat. It landed with a dull thud. I looked him dead in the eye, letting all the rage and the adrenaline and the fire I had been hiding burn right on the surface. "Surprise," I said.
Chapter 4. Lucian. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. I stood there in the gravel and grit of the old docks, surrounded by criminals, thieves, and adrenaline junkies, and I couldn't look away from the woman standing next to my car. Seraphina. My brain refused to process the image. It was like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. Seraphina was silk and silence. She was tea parties and polite nods. She was the woman who flinched if a door slammed too loud. This woman was a force of nature. Her hair was a wild, dark halo around her face, tangled from the helmet. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the adrenaline. There was a smudge of black grease on her jawline that looked like war paint. And her eyes, God, her eyes. They weren't the empty porcelain doll eyes I had seen every day for 6 months. They were blazing. They were dark, defiant, and mocking. She looked at me like she wanted to fight, and for the first time since I put a ring on her finger, she looked real. Seraphina, I said again, my voice rough. She tossed her hair back, a gesture so casual and arrogant it made my teeth ache. You look confused, Lucian. Is the lighting bad? The crowd around us had gone dead silent. They knew who I was, and now, seeing the face of the driver, they were starting to realize who she was. Whispers started to ripple through the circle. The Don's wife? That's Moretti's girl? I didn't care about the crowd. I didn't care about the stolen car. I took a step closer, invading her space. I needed to be close to her to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I smelled the exhaust clinging to her skin, mixed with her expensive perfume. It was an intoxicating, dizzying combination. You hot-wired my car, I said. It came out low, dangerous. She didn't back down. She didn't look down at her shoes. She tilted her chin up, meeting my stare head-on. I did, she said calmly. It has a sticky solenoid, by the way. You should have that looked at. I stared at her. You're criticizing my maintenance? I'm criticizing your lack of attention, she shot back. To the car. To everything. Her gaze dropped to my chest, then back up to my eyes. The heat in her stare was tangible. It wasn't the polite affection of a wife. It was the challenge of a rival. Expensive lamps don't win races, Lucian, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut right through the ambient noise of the docks. And expensive lamps don't know how to bypass an ignition coil in 30 seconds flat. The reference hit me like a physical blow. A lamp. I had said that. Tonight. On the balcony. You heard me, I said. The realization washed over me, cold and sharp. You were on the balcony? I was, she said. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't nice. It was sharp. I heard you tell Matteo how bored you were, how I was just a statue, a lemon. She stepped closer to me, until the tips of her ballet flats touched the toes of my dress, shoes. Are you bored now, Lucian? My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a violent rhythm. Bored. I felt like I had grabbed a live wire with my bare hands. Naples, I muttered, the pieces of the puzzle finally slamming together. The background check. Your father, he scrubbed it. He paid a lot of money to make me disappear, she said bitterly. He wanted a lady to sell to the highest bidder. He buried the grease, the tracks, the trophies. You're Silenzio, I said, the name tasting strange on my tongue. The Neapolitan ghost, the driver who never spoke. Silence is a weapon, Lucian, she said softly. You of all people should know that. You thought my silence was weakness. You thought I was empty. She poked a finger into the center of my chest, right over my heart. But I was just idling, waiting for a reason to shift gears. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the floor drop out from under my world. I had been married to this woman for half a year. I had slept in the same bed. I had eaten across the table from her, and I hadn't known her at all. I had treated her like a piece of furniture because I was too arrogant to look closer. I had complained about being bored while living with a woman who could drive like a demon. I felt like an idiot. But stronger than the shame, stronger than the anger of being hustled, was the sudden, overwhelming wave of lust. It crashed over me, hot and heavy. I looked at the grease on her face, the wild hair, the way her chest heaved with shallow, angry breaths. She was magnificent. She was dangerous. I grabbed her waist. Her eyes went wide, but she didn't pull away. I slammed her back against the door of the Mustang. The metal groaned under the impact. The crowd gasped. I didn't give a damn. "You hustled me," I growled, leaning down until our noses were almost touching. "You let me believe you were helpless." "I played the role you bought," she hissed back, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of my jacket. She didn't push me away. She pulled me closer. "You wanted a statue, Lucian. You didn't want me." "I didn't know you existed," I countered. "I thought you were fragile." "I am not fragile," she snapped. "I am steel, I am fire, and I am done being your ornament." "Good," I said roughly. "Because I'm done treating you like one." I didn't give her a chance to argue. I didn't give her a chance to breathe. I crashed my mouth down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't the polite, closed-mouth peck I gave her before leaving for work. It was a collision. It was a claiming. I devoured her. I kissed her with all the frustration of the last 6 months, with all the shock of the last hour. I tasted the salt on her skin, the champagne she had drunk earlier, and the adrenaline that was coursing through both of us. For a split second, she went rigid. Then she exploded. She kissed me back with a ferocity that matched mine. Her fingers tangled in my hair, gripping tight, pulling me down. She opened her mouth, inviting me in, and our tongues met in a wet, heated battle for dominance. She tasted like gasoline and rebellion. I groaned low in my throat, pressing my hips against hers, pinning her to the car. I wanted to consume her. I wanted to take her right here on the hood of the Mustang and remind everyone in this godforsaken lot that she was mine. Not the statue, not the lamp. This woman, the racer, Silenzio. She bit my lower lip, hard enough to sting, and I pulled back, breathing heavily. My forehead rested against hers. We were both gasping for air, our breaths mingling in the cold night. Her eyes were blown wide, pupils dilated, dark and endless. Her lips were swollen and red. "I am furious with you," I told her, my voice a wrecked whisper. "You stole my car. You risked your life." "I won," she whispered back, breathless, "and I didn't scratch it." I let out a short, disbelief-filled laugh. "You're insane." "I'm bored," she corrected, throwing my own words back at me again. I looked around. The crowd was watching us with rapt attention. Some of them looked terrified. Others looked jealous. I realized suddenly that this was a dangerous place for my wife to be. She had just exposed herself. She had just painted a target on her back. Protective instinct flared up, warring with the arousal. "We are leaving," I said, stepping back but keeping a hand on her hip. "Now." "I'm driving," she said instantly. I glared at her. "Absolutely not. You just raced. Your adrenaline is spiked. You're a liability." "It's my win," she argued, chin jutting out. "And I have the transponder." "I have the gun," I reminded her, patting the holster under my jacket. "And I am the Don. Get in the passenger seat, Seraphina. She hesitated. I saw the defiance war with the logic in her eyes. She looked at the crowd, then back at me. Fine, she spat. But if you grind the gears, I'm divorcing you. I almost laughed again. The sheer audacity. Get in the car, I ordered, opening the door for her. She slid into the passenger seat, tucking her gala dress around her legs. I slammed the door shut, blocking her from the eyes of the crowd. I walked around the front of the car. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to smooth it down, trying to regain some semblance of the composed Don Moretti. But my hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the rush. I got into the driver's seat. The seat was adjusted too far forward. She was shorter than me. I had to slide it back. The smell inside the car was intense, her perfume and the scent of hot engine oil. I looked over at her. She was staring out the window, arms crossed over her chest, looking like a petulant, beautiful storm cloud. I keyed the ignition. The engine roared to life, settling into that choppy idle that I usually loved. Tonight, it sounded different. It sounded like her. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the crowd, the tires crunching on the gravel. I didn't look at her again as I drove toward the exit, but I could feel her presence beside me like a physical weight. The air in the car was thick with tension, anger, secrets revealed, and a sexual tension so high it felt like the air was crackling with static. I wasn't bored anymore. I was terrified. I was furious. And I was completely, hopelessly obsessed.
Chapter 5. Seraphina. The drive back to the estate was a masterclass in silent warfare. Lucian drove the Mustang like he was angry at the asphalt. He shifted gears with a violence that made me wince, revving the engine higher than necessary, taking the corners of the highway too sharp. It was aggressive driving. It was the driving of a man who needed to hit something, but was settling for abusing the transmission. I sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed over my chest, staring out the window. My reflection in the glass looked wild. My hair was a disaster of tangles. My lips were swollen and red, and there was a smear of grease on my collarbone. I looked like I had been in a fight. In a way, I had. The kiss back at the docks hadn't been an apology. It hadn't been a romantic reconciliation. It had been a claim. It was Lucian marking his territory in front of a crowd of wolves. He hadn't kissed me because he realized he loved me. He kissed me because he realized I was valuable. He realized the lamp actually worked, and now he wanted to turn it on. The thought made bitterness rise in my throat, mixing with the lingering taste of adrenaline. We cleared the main gates, which were still stuck half open from my earlier exit, and roared up the driveway. Lucian slammed on the brakes in front of the main house, the Mustang skidding to a halt on the gravel. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He didn't wait for me. He got out, slamming his door hard enough to shake the frame. He marched around the front of the car and yanked my door open. "Inside," he said. His voice was tight, clipped. I got out, but I didn't hurry. I took my time, smoothing down the skirt of my ruined emerald gown. I met his eyes. They were dark, dilated pools of fury. "Don't order me around, Lucian," I said quietly. "I'm not one of your soldiers." "No," he snapped, grabbing my wrist and pulling me toward the front steps. "You're my wife. Which means when you decide to steal a car and expose yourself to half the criminal underworld of Chicago, it becomes my problem." I exposed myself? I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. I yanked my wrist free as we stepped into the foyer. The massive crystal chandelier overhead glittered, casting prisms of light on the marble floor. It was the same cold, perfect room I had fled hours ago. "I was wearing a helmet, Lucian. Nobody knew who I was until you made a scene." "You think a helmet protects you?" He spun around, looming over me. He looked deranged. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned, his hair messy. Do you have any idea who operates out of those docks? The Russians? The cartel? If they knew the Don's wife was joyriding in a stolen car. I wasn't joyriding, I yelled back, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I was racing. I was winning. I was doing something I'm actually good at. You were being reckless. I was being alive. I stepped into his space, poking him hard in the chest. I was bored, remember? I was just a boring, expensive lamp sitting in the dark. I thought I'd make myself useful. His jaw clenched. The reference to his insult hit him, and I saw the flash of guilt. But it was quickly swallowed by the anger. So this was revenge? He asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You risked your life to prove a point? I risked my life to feel something other than the suffocation of this house, I spat. I risked my life because for 6 months you looked right through me. You didn't want a wife, Lucian. You wanted a prop. Well, guess what? The prop has teeth. He stared at me. His chest was heaving. The air between us was so thick with tension it felt flammable. I see the teeth, he whispered, and I see the grease and the fire. He reached out, not to grab me this time, but to touch. His hand wrapped around the back of my neck, his thumb pressing into the pulse point of my throat. His skin was hot. You want to know the truth? He asked, pulling me closer until our bodies were flush. I hated the lamp. But this? This woman standing here screaming at me with engine oil on her face? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He kissed me. It was violent. It was desperate. He crashed his mouth onto mine, his tongue sweeping inside, demanding, taking. He tasted like whiskey and fury. I should have pushed him away. I should have slapped him and stormed upstairs. But I didn't. Because the rage inside me needed an outlet, and screaming wasn't enough anymore. I needed to burn it out. I made a sound in my throat, half growl, half moan, and grabbed his shirt. I bunched the expensive fabric in my fists and yanked him closer. I bit his lip, hard enough to taste copper. He groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated against my mouth. His hands dropped to my waist, gripping me tight, lifting me up. I wrapped my legs around his waist instinctively. He walked us backward until my back hit the wall near the grand staircase. The impact knocked the breath out of me, but I didn't care. You want to fight? He rasped against my neck, biting the sensitive skin there. We'll fight. I'm not a statue you can just put back on the shelf. I panted, my head falling back as his hands roamed over my body. I'm not fragile. I know, he growled. His hand found the slit in my dress. He didn't struggle with the fabric. He gripped the silk and ripped it. The sound of tearing fabric was loud in the quiet house, shocking and erotic. My dress, worth thousands of dollars, ruined in a second. Lucian, I gasped. I'll buy you 1,000 more, he muttered, his hand finding the bare skin of my thigh. I don't care about the dress, I want you. He carried me to the stairs, dropping me onto the 3rd step. The marble was cold against my back, shocking against the heat of his body hovering over me. He tore at his own clothes. Buttons flew across the foyer, pinging against the floor tiles like hail. He shoved his pants down, his eyes never leaving mine. There was no romance here. There were no candles, no soft words. This was raw. This was 2 people who had been strangers for 6 months, finally colliding. He moved between my legs. He looked massive, dark, and overwhelming. Look at me, he commanded. I glared up at him, defying him even now. I'm looking. He pushed into me. It was one smooth, powerful thrust that filled me completely. I cried out, arching my back off the stairs, my nails digging into his shoulders. He froze for a second, letting me adjust, his forehead resting against mine. His breathing was ragged. You fit, he whispered, sounding almost surprised. You fit perfectly. Then he began to move. It was a hard, punishing rhythm. He pounded into me, driving me into the stairs, claiming me with every thrust. It was possession. It was him trying to erase the last 6 months of distance in a single night. But I wasn't going to let him dominate me. Not tonight. Not ever again. I tightened my legs around him. I met his thrusts, grinding back against him. I reached up and grabbed his hair, pulling his head back so he had to look at me. "Say my name," I demanded, breathless. He looked down at me, his eyes blown black with lust. "Seraphina." "No," I hissed. "The other one." He hesitated, his hips stuttering. Then a dark smile curved his lips. "Silenzio," he groaned. The name broke me. The pleasure spiked, sharp and blinding. We moved together, a tangle of limbs and sweat and friction. The world narrowed down to the sensation of him inside me, the friction of skin on skin, the sound of our ragged breathing echoing in the empty house. He was close. I could feel the tension coiling in his muscles. He sped up, his thrusts becoming erratic, desperate. "Don't you dare close your eyes," I told him, breathless on the edge. "Watch me." He didn't close them. He watched me unravel. He watched as the pleasure took over, as I arched and cried out, my body clenching around him. And then he followed me. He groaned my name, my real name, and buried his face in my neck, pouring himself into me with a shudder that shook his entire frame. We lay there for a long time. The marble stairs were digging into my spine. My dress was in tatters. My body felt heavy, used, and gloriously exhausted. Lucian's weight was heavy on top of me, but for the first time it didn't feel suffocating. It felt grounding. His breathing slowed. He lifted his head, brushing a damp strand of hair off my forehead. His expression was soft, unguarded. It was a look I had never seen before. "Seraphina," he murmured, leaning in to kiss me gently. I turned my head. His lips brushed my cheek. He froze. I pushed against his chest. "Get off." He blinked, confused. The softness vanished, replaced by wariness. "What?" I said, "Get off me, Lucian." He pulled back, sitting up on the stairs, adjusting his clothes. I scrambled up, pulling the torn edges of my dress, together. I felt exposed, and the cold air of the foyer was starting to seep into my bones, chilling the sweat on my skin. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hardening. We just had sex." I cut him off, standing up. My legs were shaky, but I locked my knees. "We had great, angry, adrenaline-fueled sex. That's it." He stood up, towering over me again. "That wasn't just sex, that was you reacting to a new toy," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You didn't want the wife, Lucian. You were bored with the wife. You wanted the racer, you wanted the excitement." "I wanted you," he argued, reaching for me. I stepped back. "No. You wanted the version of me that hot-wired a car. But I am also the woman you ignored for 6 months. I am the woman you called a lamp." His face fell. "Seraphina, I told you." "I know what you told me," I said. "And one orgasm doesn't fix it. You don't get to keep Silenzio while disrespecting Seraphina. You don't get to have the exciting parts without apologizing to the human parts." "I am apologizing," he said, frustration bleeding into his tone. "I'm trying to tell you." "You're trying to claim me," I corrected. "There's a difference." I turned away from him. I walked up the stairs, clutching the railing because my balance was shot. "Where are you going?" he called after me. "The guest room," I said without looking back. "Seraphina, don't do this. Come back to bed." I reached the top of the landing. I turned to look at him one last time. He stood in the wreckage of his perfect foyer, half naked, looking lost. "Earn it, Lucian," I said softly. I walked down the hall to the guest suite. I stepped inside and closed the door. I turned the lock. The click was loud in the silent house. It was the sound of a boundary being drawn. I sank down against the door, sliding to the floor. And finally, for the first time that night, I let myself cry. Not because I was weak, but because I was furious that I had fallen in love with a man who had to lose me to see me.
Chapter 6. Lucian. The bed was cold. That was the first thing I registered when I woke up. The sprawling master suite was filled with morning light, but the space beside me was empty. The sheets weren't even warm. She had been gone for hours. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous night crashing back into my mind. The gala, the stolen car, the race, the woman in the helmet, and the stairs. My body felt heavy, sated in a way it hadn't been in years, but my chest felt hollow. I sat up and rubbed a hand over my face. I had messed up. I knew that. I had tried to fix a 6-month fracture with a single night of passion, and Seraphina had called me on it. Earn it, Lucian. Her voice echoed in my head. I threw off the covers and got up. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants, ignoring the shirt. I walked out into the hallway. The house was silent. I checked the guest room door. It was unlocked now, but the room was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my gut. Had she left? Had she taken the Mustang and actually run this time? I moved faster, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I passed the spot in the foyer where we had collided last night. Her ruined emerald dress was gone, likely thrown in the trash. I checked the kitchen. Empty. The coffee machine was cold. Then I heard it. A metallic clang. A curse word muttered softly. It was coming from the garage. I walked down the service corridor, the tension in my shoulders loosening slightly. She hadn't left. She was still here. I pushed open the heavy door to the garage. The sight that greeted me stopped me dead in my tracks. Seraphina was not wearing silk. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She was wearing a pair of my old gray gym shorts that rolled down her hips and a black t-shirt that was 3 sizes too big, tied in a knot at her waist to keep it out of the way. Her hair was pulled up in a messy, chaotic bun held together by what looked like a wrench, and she was under my car, not the Mustang. She was lying on a creeper dolly, slid halfway under the chassis of my armored Cadillac Escalade SUV. Her legs were sticking out, ankles crossed. She was barefoot. I walked over quietly. The garage smelled of grease and coffee. I saw a mug sitting on the workbench nearby. "You're up early," I said. She didn't jump. She didn't scramble out. She just froze for a second, then slid herself out from under the massive vehicle. She sat up on the dolly, wiping her hands on a rag. Her face had a smear of grease across the forehead. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was sharp, alert, and entirely unamused. "I couldn't sleep," she said flatly. "The guest bed is too soft." "You could have come back to the master," I said. "My mattress is firm." She shot me a look that could have stripped paint. "I told you, Lucian, I am not sleeping in your bed until you figure out who I am. Besides, I had work to do." I looked at the SUV. "You're changing the oil on the Escalade? I have staff for that, Seraphina." "Your staff are idiots," she said. She stood up, tossing the rag onto the workbench. "And one of them is trying to kill you." The air left the room. I straightened up, the playful, groveling husband vanishing instantly. The dawn took over. "Explain," I said. She walked over to the workbench. She picked up a small black box about the size of a deck of cards. It had wires trailing from it, red and blue, looking jagged where they had been cut. She held it out to me. "I came down here to check on the Mustang," she said, her voice clinical and detached. I wanted to make sure I hadn't warped the rotors last night. But then I looked at the SUV. Something bothered me. What bothered you? I asked, taking the box. It was heavy, dense. The ride height, she said. The rear driver's side was sitting 1/4 of an inch lower than the rest. On an armored car with self-leveling suspension, that shouldn't happen unless there is extra weight attached to the axle. She pointed to the box in my hand. It's a pressure plate bomb, she said. High-grade C4. The wiring job is professional, but the trigger mechanism is simple. It is wired to the speedometer and the axle rotation. It doesn't arm until the vehicle hits 40 miles an hour. It detonates at 60. I stared at the device in my hand. My blood ran cold. 60 miles an hour. That was highway speed. That was the speed I would have been doing if I had listened to Russo last night. You should take the SUV, boss. It's safer. Russo's voice played back in my head. He had been insistent. He had been sweating. He had practically begged me to take the truck. If I had listened to him, if Seraphina hadn't stolen the Mustang and forced me to take the sedan, I would be dead. I would be a smear of red paste on the I-90. You're sure? I asked, looking up at her. I disarmed it 10 minutes ago, she said. I cut the power lead before I severed the trigger. If I was wrong, we'd both be dead right now. She said it so casually, like she had just unclogged a drain. You crawled under a live bomb? I asked, my voice rising. Are you insane? I know what I'm doing, Lucian, she snapped. Unlike your head of security. Russo checked this car yesterday morning. He signed off on the log. Russo, I growled. The name tasted like bile. He wanted me in this car last night. Then he is the traitor, she said simply. He knew you had the meeting with the Russian syndicate this morning. He wanted you to die on the way there. It would look like a hit by the Russians, starting a war, while he walks away with a payout. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing away from her. This was a nightmare. My head of security. The man I trusted with my life, with my home, with my wife. I have to cancel the meeting, I said. If Russo is compromised, the Russians might be in on it. It's a trap. You can't cancel, Seraphina said. She leaned against the workbench, crossing her arms. If you don't show, you look weak. If you look weak, the other families will smell blood. You have to go. I can't go, I shouted, gesturing to the SUV. My transport is rigged. My security detail is compromised. If I get in a car with Russo's men, they'll just put a bullet in the back of my head and claim we were ambushed. So don't take Russo's men, she said. I can't drive myself to a sit-down with the Bratva, Seraphina. It's against protocol. I need a driver. I need a second. I'll drive, she said. I stopped pacing. I turned to look at her. She was standing there in my oversized gym clothes, grease on her face, smelling like motor oil and confidence. She looked ridiculous. She looked magnificent. No, I said instantly. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. You need a driver you can trust, she argued, stepping forward. Look around this room, Lucian. Who is the only person here who hasn't tried to kill you in the last 24 hours? Who is the only person who actually checked under the hood? I looked at her. She was right. It was a terrifying, humbling realization. The only person in my entire organization who was competent enough to find the bomb and loyal enough to disarm it was the wife I had called useless. You are a racer, I said, not a combat driver. If things go south, I can put a car through a gap the size of a mailbox at 100 miles an hour, she countered. Can any of your other guys do that? Or do they just know how to drive in a straight line and look tough? I hesitated. I looked at the bomb on the table. I looked at the SUV that was meant to be my coffin. Then I looked at the Mustang in the corner. "We take the Mach 1, I said. Her eyes lit up. "The Mustang?" "It's fast," I said. "It's not armored, but it's fast. And nobody expects the Don to show up in a muscle car. It throws them off." "I'm driving," she said. It wasn't a question. I took a deep breath. I was about to break every rule in the Mafia handbook. I was about to take my wife into the lion's den, but looking at the set of her jaw, the steel in her spine, I realized something. She wasn't a liability. She was the weapon I hadn't known I had. "Fine," I said. "You drive." I walked over to the gun safe built into the wall. I punched in the code. The heavy steel door swung open. I grabbed my custom 1911 and slid it into the holster at the small of my back. Then I reached for the compact Glock 19 on the top shelf. I checked the magazine. Full. I racked the slide, chambering around. I turned back to Seraphina. "Catch," I said. I tossed the gun through the air. Most women, hell, most men, would have fumbled it. They would have flinched. Seraphina didn't flinch. Her hand snapped up and snatched the weapon out of the air. Her finger stayed off the trigger, resting perfectly along the guard. She checked the safety, checked the chamber, indicator, and then looked at me. "Do you have a holster?" she asked. "Or do I have to stick this in my waistband like a gangster?" I felt a grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. Despite the bomb, despite the betrayal, despite the danger, I wanted to laugh. "Get changed," I told her. "Put on something you can move in, and wear boots." "Give me 10 minutes, she said. She set the gun down on the workbench and started walking toward the door. "Seraphina," I called out. She stopped and turned back. "Thank you," I said. My voice was serious. "For the car, for my life." She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. "I didn't do it for you, Lucian," she said quietly. "I did it because I'm not a widow? Not yet." She turned and walked out. I watched her go, the bomb sitting heavy and cold on the table beside me. Russo was going to die today. I would make sure of that. But first I had a meeting to attend. I looked at the Mustang. I looked at the spot where Seraphina had been standing. My wife was a mechanic. My wife was a racer. My wife was a savior. I grabbed a rag and wiped the grease off the bomb, my mind racing. I had underestimated her. Everyone had. And that was going to be the last mistake the Russians ever made.
Chapter 7. Seraphina. I came down the stairs 10 minutes later. The grease was gone from my face. My hair was braided back tight against my scalp, a style that wouldn't whip in my eyes if the windows were down. I wore black cargo pants tucked into combat boots, a fitted tank top, and a leather jacket that had seen more street races than galas. The Glock 19 was tucked into a holster at the small of my back. It felt heavy, a cold weight against my spine. But it was a comforting weight. Lucian was waiting by the front door. He had cleaned up too, putting his suit jacket back on to hide the shoulder holster, though he had abandoned the tie. He looked up as I descended, his dark eyes scanning me from boots to braid. He didn't look at me like a husband admiring his wife. He looked at me like a general inspecting a soldier. "You clean up well," he said. I didn't smile. This wasn't a date. This was a survival mission. I unlocked the front door and stepped out into the morning chill. The sun was fully up now, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. The Mustang sat idling where Lucian had left it, the rumble of the V8 engine bouncing off the stone facade of the house. It looked aggressive, low to the ground, a coiled spring waiting to snap. I walked to the driver's side. Lucian moved to the passenger door. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over the handle. I saw the struggle in his face. He was the Don. He was used to driving, to controlling the destination, to having the wheel in his hands. Getting into the passenger seat while his wife drove him into a war zone went against every instinct he possessed. "Get in, Lucian," I said, opening my door. "Unless you want to walk." He clenched his jaw, nodded once, and got in. I slid into the driver's seat. It fit me perfectly now. I adjusted the mirrors, checked the fuel gauge, and gripped the wood-grain steering wheel. I revved the engine once, just to feel the vibration travel through the chassis. "Let's go," Lucian said, staring straight ahead. "And try not to kill us before the Russians get a chance." I dropped the parking brake and put the car in gear. We rolled down the driveway, past the gate I had hacked the night before, and out onto the main road. "Where are we going?" I asked. "The meet is at the shipyard warehouse on 5th, right?" Lucian nodded, checking the magazine of his gun for the third time. "Correct." Russo set it up. He said the Russians wanted neutral ground. "Neutral ground?" I scoffed. "It's a kill box. One way in, one way out, surrounded by shipping containers for snipers. If we drive into that warehouse, we don't come out." "I know," Lucian said darkly. "But if I don't show, I look weak. And if I look weak, the Bratva moves on my territory by sunset." "We aren't going to the warehouse," I said, turning the wheel. I swung the Mustang off the main highway and onto a service road that ran parallel to the industrial district. Lucian looked at me sharply. "This isn't the way." "It's the way if you want to live," I countered. "Listen to me." Russo wired the SUV with a tracker. He expects us to be on the I-90 right now. He's watching a blinking dot on a screen, waiting for it to stop moving so he can detonate the bomb. Lucian swore softly. "He thinks we took the truck." "Exactly. But I found the tracker on the SUV before I came upstairs. It was a magnetic puck inside the rear bumper. You removed it?" I smiled, a tight, dangerous curling of my lips. "Better." I stuck it on a refrigerated delivery truck that was leaving the compound to make a drop-off. Lucian stared at me. "You put it on a truck?" "A fish truck, actually. Right now, the main Russian hit squad and your traitor Russo are currently tracking a shipment of Atlantic salmon heading north toward Wisconsin. By the time they realize we aren't in that vehicle, we will be halfway through the industrial district." Lucian let out a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. "You split their forces. Tactics," I said simply. "But we aren't clear yet. Russo isn't stupid. He will have visual spotters watching the perimeter of the warehouse, just in case the bomb fails. The B team, we hit the edge of the industrial sector. The roads here were cracked and scarred, lined with rusted chain-link fences and abandoned factories. I slowed down, keeping the revs high, scanning the mirrors. The Mustang was loud. There was no sneaking up on anyone in this car. "There," I said, nodding toward a side street. 3 black SUVs were idling at the intersection 3 blocks down. They were positioned to watch the main approach to the warehouse. They saw us instantly. The Mustang stood out like a flare in the dark. The SUVs peeled out, tires screeching, turning to intercept us. "Hold on," I said calmly. I didn't speed up. I kept the car steady, letting them close the distance. "What are you doing?" Lucian asked, his hand tightening on the door handle. "Seraphina, drive." "Not yet." The lead SUV was closing in fast, trying to box us in against the factory wall. The window rolled down, and I saw the barrel of an automatic weapon poke out. "Now." I slammed on the brakes, locking all 4 wheels. The Mustang skidded, smoke pouring from the tires. I threw the shifter into reverse. The transmission whined as I floored it. The Mustang shot backward, threading the needle between a telephone pole and a dumpster. The SUV driver swerved, missing us by inches, and slammed into the curb. I kept going in reverse, looking over my shoulder. The other 2 SUVs corrected their course and came after us. We were doing 40 miles an hour backward down a narrow alley. "Seraphina!" Lucian yelled. "I've got it!" I waited until we hit the intersection at the end of the alley. I whipped the steering wheel hard to the left. The front of the car whipped around in a violent arc. The world spun. It was a Rockford turn. A reverse 180. As the nose of the car swung around to face forward, I slammed the clutch, shifted into first, and dumped it. The tires caught immediately. The car lunged forward, seamlessly transitioning from reverse to forward momentum without losing speed. Lucian was thrown against the door, then back into his seat. "Naples drift!" I shouted over the engine roar. Lucian recovered instantly. He rolled down his window as the two remaining SUVs tried to make the turn behind us. They were heavy, top-heavy trucks. They couldn't corner like a muscle car. Lucian leaned out the window. The wind whipped his suit jacket. He leveled his gun, taking aim with a terrifying calmness. Bang, bang, bang. The shots were deafening inside the cabin. The lead SUV's front tire exploded. The vehicle lurched violently to the right, crashing through a chain-link fence and slamming into a stack of pallets. "One down," Lucian yelled, pulling back inside. The last SUV was still on us. A gunman was leaning out of the sunroof, firing at us. Bullets pinged off the trunk of the Mustang. I flinched, ducking my head lower. "Don't let them scratch the paint," I yelled. Lucian laughed. It was a loud, wild sound that I had never heard before. He looked at me, his eyes shining with adrenaline. "Drive, Silenzio! Just drive!" I pushed the Mustang to its limit. We tore through the maze of the industrial park. I took corners that shouldn't have been possible, drifting the rear end around obstacles, using the layout of the streets that I had memorized from satellite maps years ago. The SUV couldn't keep up. It was powerful, but it lacked the agility. I saw a ramp ahead, a loading dock with a steep incline. I hit it at 60. The Mustang went airborne for a split second, the suspension unweighting, before slamming down onto the upper level of the shipping yard. The SUV tried to follow, but the driver hesitated. He braked. That was his mistake. We were gone. I wove through the stacks of shipping containers, taking random turns, doubling back, creating a chaotic pattern that no tail could follow. 5 minutes later, the rearview mirror was empty. I slowed the car down, letting the engine idle settle. We were deep in the labyrinth of the shipyard, miles away from the kill box. I pulled the car into the shadow of a rusted crane and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the ticking of the cooling metal and our own ragged breathing. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked over at Lucian. He was staring at me. His hair was windblown, his tie was gone, and he was holding a smoking gun. He looked nothing like the polished Don I had married. He looked alive. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and absolute reverence. "Remind me," he said, his voice rough, "never to make you angry in a parking lot." I let out a breathy laugh, leaning my head back against the headrest. "You handled yourself well, Lucian. Good shooting." He shook his head slowly. "I just pulled a trigger. You made this car dance." He reached out, his hand covering mine on the steering wheel. His skin was hot. His grip was firm. "That turn," he whispered, "the reverse spin. Where did you learn to handle a car like that?" I turned my head to look at him. "The streets," I said softly. "Naples isn't just about pizza and history, Lucian. It's about survival and speed." He rubbed his thumb over my knuckles. "I see that," he said. He leaned across the center console. I thought he was going to kiss me, but he didn't. He just rested his forehead against mine, closing his eyes. "We're alive," he murmured, "because of you." "Because we're a team," I corrected him. He pulled back, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Russo is going to pay for this," he said, the coldness of the dawn returning to his voice. "But right now, We need to get off the street. This car is too conspicuous. I know a place, I said. A safe house. It's not on your books. It's one of my father's old stash spots that he forgot about. Russo won't know it. Take us there, Lucian said. I started the engine. The Mustang purred, ready for more. Lucian sat back, holstering his gun, but his hand stayed on my thigh. A warm, heavy weight that grounded me. You realize, he said as we pulled out of the shadows, that you are terrifying. I smirked, shifting into second gear. Only when I'm bored, Lucian. Only when I'm bored.
Chapter 8. Lucian. The safe house was a dump. That was my first assessment as Seraphina pulled the Mustang into a rusted corrugated shed behind an abandoned auto body shop. The place smelled of dry rot, old tires, and neglect. It was miles off the grid, buried deep in a part of the city that city planning had forgotten about 2 decades ago. She killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was sudden and heavy, ringing in my ears after the chaos of the gunfire and the roar of the V8. We sat there for a moment in the dark. The heat from the engine ticked and pinged as the metal cooled. Dust motes danced in the sliver of sunlight cutting through the cracks in the shed walls. I looked over at my wife. She was slumped back in the driver's seat, her head resting against the seat, eyes closed. Her hands were still gripping the wheel, knuckles white. A loose strand of hair had escaped her braid and was stuck to her cheek with sweat. She looked exhausted. She looked filthy. She looked incredible. "We are safe," she whispered, not opening her eyes. "Nobody knows about this place except my father, and he forgot about it 10 years ago." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The click was loud. "Let's get inside," I said. "We need water. We need to regroup." She opened her eyes. They were dark, dilated, and guarded. The adrenaline was fading, and the reality of what we had just done, and what had been done to us, was setting in. We got out of the car. I did a quick sweep of the perimeter while she unlocked the side door of the main building with a key hidden under a loose brick. It was old school. It was sloppy security. But right now, obscurity was our best defense. The interior was basically one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom that I prayed worked. There was a mattress on the floor in the corner covered in a plastic sheet, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a layer of dust thick enough to write your name in. Seraphina walked straight to the cupboards. She pulled out a bottle of water and a bottle of cheap whiskey that looked like it had been aging there since the Nixon administration. She cracked the water seal and downed half of it in one go. Then she opened the whiskey. She didn't bother with glasses. She took a pull straight from the bottle, grimaced at the burn, and handed it to me. I took it. I drank. It tasted like gasoline and oak, burning a path straight down my throat. It was exactly what I needed. We sat on the floor. The chairs looked like they wouldn't hold the weight of a ghost, let alone a man. We sat with our backs against the wall, our shoulders touching, legs stretched out in front of us. The silence stretched out. It wasn't the angry silence of the car ride home from the gala. It was the heavy, exhausted silence of survivors. I looked at the side of her face. She was staring at a spiderweb in the corner. "Why did you say it?" she asked softly. I didn't have to ask what she meant. The words had been hanging between us like smoke since the balcony. Seraphina turned her head to look at me. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired and hurt. "You called me a lamp, Lucian. You said I was boring. You said you were suffocating." I took another drink of the whiskey, letting the burn settle in my stomach before I set the bottle down on the dusty floorboards. "I messed up," I said. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Yeah, you did. You didn't hear the end of the sentence, I told her. She frowned. There was more? Yes. I shifted, turning my body so I was facing her. I needed her to see my face. I needed her to know I wasn't lying. I told Matteo I was bored because I felt guilty, Seraphina. Guilty? She repeated, skepticism etched into her brow. I nodded. I told him I felt like I had trapped a wild bird in a cage. I looked at you every day. So perfect, so quiet, so careful. And I hated myself. I thought I had done that to you. I thought the weight of my world, the danger of my life, had crushed you. I reached out and brushed the stray hair off her cheek. She flinched slightly but didn't pull away. I said I was suffocating because I thought I was living with a stranger. I continued, my voice low. I thought your silence was sadness. I thought you were miserable being married to me, and that you had just resigned yourself to being an ornament because you were too afraid to be anything else. I looked at her hands, those capable, dangerous hands that had just drifted a muscle car through a war zone. I didn't think you were weak, I whispered. I thought you were too good for this life. I thought I had dimmed your light. Seraphina stared at me, her lips parted slightly. The defensive wall she had built up, the wall of Silenzio, cracked just a little. You thought I was sad? She asked. I thought you were broken, I admitted, and I thought I was the one who broke you. She shook her head slowly, a strange look crossing her face. I wasn't broken, Lucian. I was idling. Idling, I repeated, a small smile tugging at my mouth. Yes, I was waiting for the green light. I was waiting for you to look at me and see something other than the Don's wife. But you never looked. You just saw the dress. I saw what you showed me. I countered gently. You wore the mask well, Seraphina. I had to, she said. My father. He told me that if I showed you who I really was, you would send me back. He said men like you don't want complications. You want peace. You want a smiling face at the dinner table, not a mechanic in the garage. He was wrong, I said. He was right about most men, she argued. I am not most men, I growled softly. I moved closer. The space between us evaporated. I could smell her sweat, the exhaust fumes, the cheap whiskey, and the expensive perfume that was fading beneath it all. It was the most intoxicating scent I had ever encountered. I don't want peace, I told her, my hand cupping her jaw. I tried peace. It was boring. It was lonely. She looked into my eyes, searching for the lie, searching for the trick. What do you want? She whispered. I want the trouble, I said. I want the fire. I want the woman who hotwires my car and saves my life and argues with me in the middle of a gunfight. Her breath hitched. I want Silenzio, I said, running my thumb over her lower lip. But I want Seraphina too. I want the woman who can wear the silk dress and the woman who can ruin it. I want a partner. A tear slipped out of the corner of her eye. She angrily wiped it away, sniffing. You're just saying that because I saved your ass. I laughed. It was a genuine sound that rumbled in my chest. I'm saying it because watching you drive that car was the most turn-on moment of my entire life. I'm saying it because when you pulled that helmet off, I felt like I had been holding my breath for 6 months, and I finally inhaled. She let out a shaky breath. She leaned her face into my hand. I'm not easy, Lucian, she warned. I'm stubborn. I have a temper, and I drive too fast. Good, I said. Keep me on my toes. I leaned in. I didn't crash into her like I had at the docks. I didn't take her like I had on the stairs. This wasn't about adrenaline or anger or claiming. This was an apology. I kissed her softly. I pressed my lips to hers and waited. I waited for her to let me in. She sighed, a sound of surrender, and opened her mouth. The kiss was slow. It was deep and deliberate, tasting of whiskey and relief. It was the kind of kiss that seals a pact. I pulled her onto my lap. She straddled me, her legs going around my waist, her boots heavy against the floorboards. She wrapped her arms around my neck and buried her hands in my hair. We didn't rush. The danger was outside. The traitor was waiting. The war was coming. But in this dusty, forgotten room, we had time. I ran my hands down her back, tracing the spine through her tank top. I felt the tension leaving her muscles, replaced by a different kind of heat. You know, she murmured against my lips, pulling back just an inch. What? If we survive this? I'm keeping the Mustang. I chuckled, nipping at her jawline. If we survive this, Tesoro, I will buy you a fleet of Mustangs. I will build you a racetrack in the backyard. She pushed my shoulder, but she was smiling. I don't want a fleet. I want that one. It has character. It's yours, I promised. I kissed down the column of her neck, finding the pulse that was fluttering there. It was strong. It was fast. I unbuckled the shoulder holster and set my gun on the floor. She reached behind her back and unclipped hers, setting the Glock next to mine. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. We were disarming. We were putting down the weapons we used against the world so we could just be us. I reached for the hem of her tank top. Can I asked. She nodded. I pulled the shirt over her head. She wasn't wearing a bra. Her skin was flushed, beautiful in the dim light. I traced the curve of her breast with my fingertips, reverent. You are magnificent, I whispered. She leaned down and kissed me, pushing me back until I was lying on the dusty floor and she was hovering over me. Her hair fell around us like a curtain, shielding us from the rest of the dirty room. Show me, she commanded softly. And I did. I showed her with my hands, with my mouth, with every touch. I showed her that the lamp wasn't just decorative. I showed her that the statue was flesh and blood. We made love on the hard floor of a safe house, surrounded by dust and danger, and it was the most honest thing I had ever done. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about duty. It was about two people who had been driving parallel roads finally merging into the same lane. When we finished, lying tangled together in the quiet aftermath, she rested her head on my chest. I stroked her hair, listening to her breathing slow down. Lucian, she whispered. Yeah, I'm not sad anymore. I kissed the top of her head, closing my eyes, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Neither am I, Seraphina. Neither am I.
Chapter 9. Seraphina. Waking up on a hardwood floor is not something I would recommend to anyone over the age of 25. My hip was digging into a gap between the planks. My neck was stiff. My leather jacket, which I had used as a makeshift pillow, offered about as much cushioning as a sheet of paper. I groaned, rolling onto my back and shielding my eyes from the invasive beam of sunlight cutting through the shed's single, grime-streaked window. Dust motes danced in the light, swirling in the disturbed air. But then I smelled it. Coffee. Real hot coffee. I pushed myself up, wincing as my muscles protested the abuse of the last 24 hours. The adrenaline crash had hit me hard while I slept, leaving me feeling heavy and bruised, but my mind was surprisingly clear. Lucian was sitting on one of the rickety chairs near the door. He had clearly been awake for a while. He had put his shirt back on, though it was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, and he was watching something on his phone. He looked up as I moved. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face. It wasn't the polite smile of the gala. It was intimate. It was possessive. "Good morning," he said. I ran a hand through my tangled hair, trying to look somewhat dignified despite sleeping on a floor in an abandoned industrial park. "Where did you get coffee?" I asked, my voice rasping. Lucian nodded toward a paper bag on the table. I made a call. One of my loyal captains dropped it off at the perimeter, along with a fresh change of clothes for me and some tactical gear. "Don't worry." He didn't see the car. I crawled over to the table. I didn't care about dignity anymore. I cared about caffeine. I grabbed the cardboard cup and took a sip. It was black, strong, and tasted like heaven. Lucian watched me drink, his eyes tracking the movement of my throat. "We need to talk," he said. I lowered the cup, bracing myself. This was it. The morning after. The part where the reality sets in, and the Don realizes that having a wife who races cars and shoots guns is a liability he can't afford. I waited for him to tell me to go back to being a statue. I waited for him to tell me that last night was a mistake. Lucian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I made some calls while you were sleeping," he started. "I put the main compound on lockdown. Nobody in or out until we resolve this. I also froze Russo's accounts, though I doubt he's using his official bank right now." I nodded. "Smart. But that's just immediate damage control," he said. "We need a long-term solution." I stared at him. "What kind of solution?" "I'm restructuring," he said. He stood up and walked over to where I was sitting on the floor. He crouched down so we were eye level. "I realized something yesterday, Seraphina. My transport logistics are a disaster. My drivers are slow. My fleet maintenance is sloppy. And apparently my head of security can plant a bomb on my personal vehicle without anyone noticing, because nobody actually checks the cars." He paused, searching my face. "I need a new head of logistics," he said. I blinked. I lowered the coffee cup slowly. "What?" "I want you to run the garage," he said, his voice serious. "I want you to vet every car that comes into the fleet. I want you to train the drivers on evasion and pursuit. I want you to manage the mechanics so I know they aren't cutting corners or taking bribes." He was offering me a job. Not a token role. Not a charity position on a charity board. He was offering me control over the literal engines of his empire. He was offering me a seat at the table. "You're serious," I said. "Deadly," he replied. "You're the only person I trust to do it. You have the eye. You have the skill. And frankly, you drive better than anyone on my payroll." I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. For 6 months I had been hiding, terrified that my skills were my shame. Now Lucian was looking at those skills and calling them an asset. He waited, watching me. I stood up, stretching my legs. I walked over to the window, looking out at the overgrown weeds and the rusted quiet of the yard. "I have conditions," I said, turning back to him. "Name them." "First, I keep the Mustang," I said. "It's not part of the fleet, it's mine. Nobody touches it. Nobody drives it, not even you." Lucian grinned. "Consider the title transferred? What else?" "I race," I said. "On weekends, at the docks or wherever the circuit moves. You don't stop me. You don't hide me." His grin faded slightly, replaced by a look of calculation. He was weighing the risk. The Don's wife at illegal street races was a security nightmare. But he had said he wanted the fire. He had said he wanted Silenzio. "Done," he said finally, "under one condition. You take a security detail. They stay out of your way. They don't interfere with the race, but they watch your back." "I can live with that," I agreed. "Then we have a deal, partner." Partner. The word hung in the air, heavy and significant. "Okay, partner," I said, setting the coffee down. "Now let's handle the traitor." I walked over to the leather jacket I had discarded on the floor the night before. I reached into the deep inner pocket and pulled out the black plastic box I had stripped from the SUV. The bomb trigger. I placed it on the table between us. It looked innocuous, just a lump of plastic and wire. But it was the evidence that was going to bury Russo. Lucian picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "It looks like standard tech," he said. "It looks like it," I corrected. "But it isn't." I pulled a small penlight from the pocket of my cargo pants, a habit from my mechanic days, and shone it into the cracked casing of the box where I had ripped the wires out. "Look at the soldering," I said, pointing to the messy blobs of silver metal connecting the circuit board. Lucian squinted. "It looks messy." "It's sloppy," I said. "Russians are precise. They use military-grade components. They use fiber wiring because it's faster and harder to jam. This is copper wire." I tapped the frayed red wire. "Copper is cheap. It corrodes. It's amateur hour. If the Bratva wanted you dead, they wouldn't use a rig like this. They would have used a magnetic charge with a remote detonator, not a pressure plate wired to the axle. This is strictly local." Lucian looked at me, his eyes dark. "So Russo isn't working with the Russians. He's trying to frame them." "Exactly," I said. "He wanted you to die on the way to the meeting. It would look like the Russians hit you to start a war. In the chaos, Russo steps up, maybe aligns with a rival family and takes a payout." "But where did he get this?" Lucian asked, tapping the box. "Russo is a muscle guy, not a tech guy. He didn't build this." "No," I agreed. "He bought it, and I know exactly where." I shone the light on the corner of the circuit board. There was a tiny, almost invisible etching scratched into the green resin, a crude shape of a cleaver. "You see that mark?" I asked. Lucian nodded. "That's the signature of the chop shop on 5th Street, I said. "They call the guy who runs it the Butcher. He strips stolen cars for parts, but he also builds custom electronics for insurance fraud. You know, devices to short out airbags or fake mileage." Lucian's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "The Butcher," he muttered. "That's in Russo's collection territory." "Exactly," I said. "Russo has been squeezing that shop for protection money for years. It makes sense he would go there for a favor. He needed something that looked dangerous but couldn't be traced back to him. He didn't count on anyone looking close enough to see the signature." Lucian set the box down. The sound was like a gavel hitting a bench. "He thought I was too important to look under the hood," Lucian said quietly. "And he thought you were too stupid to know what you were looking at." "He thought I was a lamp," I reminded him. Lucian stood up. The relaxed lover from 10 minutes ago was gone. The dawn was back, and he was terrifying. He walked to the bag his captain had dropped off and pulled out a fresh Kevlar vest. He strapped it on over his shirt. "We know who," Lucian said. "We know where. And now we know why." He tossed me a second vest. It was lighter, cut for concealment, but it would stop a bullet. "Put it on," he ordered. I strapped the vest on, pulling my tank top back over it. It felt snug, restrictive, but necessary. I shrugged my leather jacket on over it. "What's the play?" I asked. Lucian checked his gun, sliding it into the shoulder holster. "We go to the warehouse," he said. "Russo is waiting there. He thinks I'm dead. He's probably already drafting his speech about how the Russians betrayed us." "We walk in the front door?" I asked, checking my own Glock. "We walk in," Lucian confirmed, "but we don't walk in alone. My loyal captains are meeting us 2 blocks out. We surround the place. But I want to be the one to look him in the eye." "And me?" I asked. Lucian turned to me. He reached out, his hand cupping the back of my neck, pulling me in for a hard, brief kiss. "You're coming with me," he said. "You're the evidence, Seraphina. You're the one who found the bomb. You're the one who saved the family." He looked at the bomb trigger on the table, Grab that, he said. We're going to shove it down his throat. I picked up the black box and shoved it into my jacket pocket. I walked to the door and opened it. The sunlight hit my face, bright and harsh. The Mustang was waiting in the tall grass, looking like a predatory animal lying in wait. Lucian walked out past me. He stopped at the car and looked at the driver's seat. He looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. I slid into the driver's seat. The seat was still adjusted perfectly for me. The engine fired up on the first turn of the key, that familiar, aggressive rumble shaking the frame. I looked over at Lucian. He was buckling his seatbelt, his face set in stone, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "Ready?" I asked. He looked at me. The hardness in his eyes softened for just a fraction of a second. "Drive me wild, Silenzio," he said. I dropped the parking brake. I spun the wheel. And we drove toward the war.
Chapter 10. Lucian. The warehouse district was quiet. It was the kind of unnatural silence that hangs over a graveyard before a funeral. I sat in the passenger seat of the Mustang, checking the slide on my Glock 19. The weight of the weapon was familiar, grounding. Beside me, Seraphina drove with one hand on the wheel, her eyes scanning the perimeter with the cold calculation of a predator. She didn't look like my wife. Not the wife I had married 6 months ago. That woman wore silk and lowered her eyes. This woman wore leather and Kevlar and looked ready to burn the world down. I had never been more in love with her. We pulled up 2 blocks from the main warehouse on 5th Street. My personal transport team, the loyal ones, the ones Matteo had vetted personally, were already in position. I saw the black sedans idling in the alleyways, blending into the shadows. Seraphina killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, heavy and thick. She turned to me. Her face was calm, but her pupils were blown wide. The adrenaline was there, simmering just beneath the surface. "Russo is inside," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. Matteo confirmed it. "He has 12 guys with him. Most are just muscle, paid to stand around and look tough. They don't know about the bomb. They think they are here for a security briefing." "And Russo?" she asked. "Russo is waiting for a phone call telling him that his boss is spread across the I-90 in 1,000 burning pieces." Seraphina smirked. It was a terrifying expression. "Let's go disappoint him," she said. We got out of the car. The wind coming off the lake was biting, whipping Seraphina's leather jacket around her waist. But she didn't shiver. She moved with a fluid, lethal grace that made my chest ache with pride. We met Matteo at the side entrance. My underboss looked tired, his tie loosened, a submachine gun hanging from a strap over his shoulder. When he saw Seraphina, he stopped dead. He blinked, looking from her combat boots to the gun on her hip, then up to her braided hair. "Seraphina?" he asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. She didn't miss a beat. "Hello, Matteo. Nice gun." Matteo looked at me, mouth slightly open. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "I'll explain later," I said. "Is the perimeter secure?" "Locked down," Matteo said, still staring at my wife. "We have guys on the roof and the back exits. Russo is in the main office on the catwalk floor. He's pacing." "Good," I said. "Let's go say hello." We moved into the warehouse. It was a massive, cavernous space filled with crates of imported electronics and the smell of dust and diesel. My men moved silently, flanking us, securing the ground floor. I didn't sneak. I didn't hide. I walked right down the center aisle, my heels clicking on the concrete. Seraphina walked right beside me, not behind me, beside me. Russo was up on the metal catwalk, leaning over the railing, looking at his phone. He looked impatient. He looked arrogant. Then he looked down. I watched the color drain from his face. It was instantaneous. 1 second he was the king of the castle, planning his ascension. The next, he was a ghost looking at his own grave. "Lucian," he stammered. His voice echoed in the empty space. He gripped the railing, his knuckles turning white. You're supposed to be dead?" I finished for him. My voice was calm, projecting easily to the rafters. "I know, Russo. It's a disappointment." He looked around wildly. He saw my men emerging from the shadows, weapons raised. He saw he was surrounded. But then his eyes landed on Seraphina. He frowned, confusion warring with the panic. "You brought your wife?" He sneered, trying to find some footing, some leverage. "You're hiding behind the skirt, boss? That's pathetic even for you." I felt Seraphina stiffen beside me, but she didn't lunge. She didn't shout. I stopped walking. We were directly below him now. "I'm not hiding," I said coldly. Seraphina stepped forward. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the black plastic box, the bomb trigger. She held it up, catching the light from the industrial lamps overhead. Russo froze. "Recognize this, Russo?" she asked. Her voice was steady, clear, and dripping with disdain. Russo didn't answer. He couldn't. "You tried to be clever," Seraphina continued, walking a slow circle, addressing the room, addressing the confused muscle-standing guard. "You wired it to the axle. Pressure plate trigger. Smart, hard to detect during a visual sweep." She tossed the box onto a wooden crate nearby. It landed with a heavy thud. "But you got sloppy," she said. "You used copper wiring." She looked up at him, tilting her head. "The Russians use fiber, Russo. They use military spec. This is garbage. This is from the butcher's shop on 5th Street. Murmurs broke out among the guards. They knew the butcher. They knew it was a chop shop for low-level insurance fraud. Russo's face twisted. "She's lying," he shouted, desperate. "She's just a dumb trophy. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Seraphina laughed. It was a dark sound. "I know that you etched the butcher's signature onto the circuit board," she said. "I know you paid him to build a device that looked like Bratva tech, but failed to verify the components. And I know you're the one who signed off on the security log for the SUV yesterday morning." She pointed a finger at him. "You tried to kill your Don with cheap parts, Russo. That's not just treason. It's insulting." Russo looked at his men. He realized he had lost them. They were lowering their weapons, looking at him with disgust. In our world, betrayal was bad, but incompetence was unforgivable. Panic took over. Russo went for his hip holster. He was fast. I'll give him that. He cleared leather in under a second, raising the gun, aiming not at me, but at Seraphina. He wanted to take her down. He wanted to hurt me by hurting her. Big mistake. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I raised my arm and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. My bullet took him in the right shoulder. It spun him around, shattering the clavicle. His gun went flying over the railing, clattering onto the concrete floor below. Russo screamed, clutching his shoulder, and dropped to his knees on the catwalk. 2 of my captains were on him instantly, kicking him flat and zip-tying his hands. I lowered my weapon. The smoke curled from the barrel, the smell of cordite filling the air. I looked at Seraphina. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't ducked. She was standing there with her hand on her own weapon, ready to draw if I had missed. She looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "Nice shot," she said. I aimed for the head. I lied. She smirked. No, you didn't. You want him alive so you can make him an example. She knew me too well. I turned to the room. The 12 guards Russo had hired were standing there, hands raised, looking terrified. They were waiting for the order. They were waiting to see if they were going to die today. I holstered my gun. I walked over to Seraphina. I wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against my side. I felt the Kevlar vest under her jacket, felt the solid warmth of her body. I looked at Matteo, then at the guards. Russo is finished, I announced. His territory is dissolved. His assets are seized. I looked down at Seraphina. I brushed a stray hair from her forehead, letting my hand linger on her cheek. And there are going to be changes in how we operate, I continued, my voice hard as iron. I turned Seraphina so she was facing the room. I stood behind her, my hands on her shoulders. This is not just my wife, I said. The room was silent. This is the new head of logistics, I declared. She vets the cars, she trains the drivers, she secures the transport lines. Matteo's jaw dropped again. She is the reason I am standing here, I said. She found the bomb. She drove the car. She saved the family. I tightened my grip on her shoulders. From now on, she speaks with my voice. If she gives an order, you follow it. If she tells you a car isn't safe, you don't drive it. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single man. This is Silenzio, I said. The name rippled through the room. They knew the legend. They knew the racer. The connection was being made, eyes widening in realization. Disrespect her, I said softly, and you walk home. If you're lucky enough to still have legs. I looked down at her. Do you have anything to add? I asked. Seraphina stepped forward, shedding my hold. She stood in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by killers, and she looked completely at home. Just one thing, she said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. She pointed to the fleet of black SUVs parked near the loading dock. Those tires are underinflated by 4 psi, she said. Fix them. You're wasting fuel and compromising grip. She turned on her heel and walked back to me. Let's go, Lucian. I'm hungry. I stared at her for a second. Then I let out a laugh. It was a sound of pure relief and joy. I nodded to Matteo. Clean this up. I'll be at the safe house if the world ends. Otherwise, don't call me. Matteo nodded, looking dazed. Yes, boss, I took Seraphina's hand. We walked out of the warehouse, leaving the chaos and the politics behind us. The sun was high in the sky now, burning off the morning mist. The Mustang was waiting where we left it, sleek and black and dangerous. We walked to the car. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hum of contentment in my veins. I stopped at the passenger door. I opened it for her. She looked at the open door, then at me. You're driving? She asked. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm riding shotgun. She smiled. It was the real smile, the one that reached her eyes and lit up her face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She walked around to the driver's side. She opened the door and slid in. I got in beside her. The car smelled like us, like danger and victory. She started the engine. The rumble vibrated through the seats. Where to? She asked, revving the engine once just to hear it growl. Home, I said. And then maybe the racetrack. She put the car in gear. She looked over at me, her eyes sparkling. You know, she said, teasing. For a guy who was bored yesterday, you've had a pretty exciting 24 hours. I reached over and put my hand on her thigh, squeezing gently. Boredom is a thing of the past, I promised. She winked at me. Hold on, Lucian, she said. She dropped the clutch. The tires screamed. The Mustang launched forward, pinning us to the seats. We roared down the empty industrial road, leaving the smoke and the wreckage in the rearview mirror. I watched her drive. I watched her hands on the wheel, confident and steady. I watched the wind catch her hair. My wife, my partner, my Silenzio. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, listening to the engine sing. Drive me wild, I thought. And she did. The end. 3 years later. Lucian. The sun was setting over the private asphalt track I had built behind the estate. The sky was a bruised purple and orange, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The air smelled of high-octane fuel and grilled steak from the barbecue Matteo was manning near the pit lane. It was a perfect Saturday evening. I leaned against the hood of my armored SUV, my arms crossed, watching the final lap. 2 cars were tearing down the straightaway. One was a brand-new Ferrari 488, driven by my newest captain, a kid named Marco who thought he was the fastest thing on 4 wheels. The other was a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1, black on black. The Ferrari had the horsepower. It had the aerodynamics. It had millions of dollars of computer-assisted traction control. It didn't stand a chance. I watched as they hit the final chicane. Marco braked early, terrified of spinning out his 6-figure bonus. The Mustang didn't brake. It drifted. The back end swung out, tires smoking, sliding through the corner with a grace that defied physics. It was aggressive, precise, and terrifying. It cut the inside line, passing the Ferrari while going sideways. I smiled. The Mustang roared across the finish line 3 seconds ahead of the Italian supercar. It pulled into the pit lane, the engine rumbling with that familiar, choppy idle. The Ferrari pulled in behind it, looking defeated. The driver's door of the Mustang opened. Seraphina stepped out. She wasn't wearing a gala gown today. She was wearing a grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit tied at the waist, a white tank top, and combat boots. Her hair was a wild halo of curls escaping her ponytail. She looked breathtaking. She pulled off her helmet and shook her hair out, grinning as Marco got out of the Ferrari looking pale. "Good race, Marco," she called out, tossing him a water bottle. "But you're braking too early on the hairpin. Trust the downforce." "Yes, boss," Marco said, looking humbled. "I'll work on it." She patted the hood of the Mustang, her Mustang, and walked over to me. Her stride was confident, the walk of a woman who owned the pavement and the man standing on it. "You went easy on him," I said as she approached. She smirked, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "He's new. I didn't want to make him cry on his first day. Bad for morale." I reached out and pulled her between my legs, wrapping my arms around her waist. She smelled like exhaust and vanilla. It was my favorite scent in the world. "You're dangerous," I murmured, kissing her forehead. "I'm efficient," she corrected. "The fleet is running at 100% efficiency, Lucian. Our transport times are down 20% since I took over." "I know," I said. "I see the numbers. You're the best hire I ever made." "And the cheapest," she teased. "I work for car parts." "And jewelry," I reminded her. "I saw the receipt for those diamond earrings." "Hazard pay," she countered. A squeal of delight interrupted us. "Mama! Mama! Fast!" I looked down. Running across the tarmac, escaping his nanny's grasp, was a 2-year-old boy with dark curls and eyes that were already looking for trouble. Leo. Seraphina broke away from me and scooped him up. He was wearing a miniature racing suit that Seraphina had custom-ordered. "Did you see Mama?" she asked him, bouncing him on her hip. "Did you see the car go vroom?" "Vroom," Leo shouted, throwing his hands up. Mama, win! Mama always wins, I said, stroking my son's back. Seraphina looked at me over Leo's head. Her eyes were soft, happy. The shadows that used to live there, the silence of the statue, were gone completely. Are you happy, Lucian? She asked quietly. I looked at the track I built for her. I looked at the fleet of cars she managed. I looked at the son we made and the woman who held my entire world in her grease-stained hands. I thought back to the night on the balcony. The night I complained about being bored. The night I almost lost her. I haven't been bored in 3 years, I told her honestly. Not for a single second. She smiled, leaning in to kiss me. It was a slow, deep kiss that tasted of promise. Good, she whispered against my lips. Because I just bought a 1970 Chevelle SS and I need help restoring the engine. I groaned, resting my forehead against hers. Another muscle car? I asked. Our garage is full. We'll build a bigger garage, she said simply. Leo reached out and grabbed my nose. Dada fix, I laughed, taking my son from her arms. Yeah, I said. Dada will fix. I put my arm around my wife's shoulders. We walked toward the house, the sun setting behind us, the engines cooling in the distance. Life wasn't quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud, chaotic, and fast, and I wouldn't trade the ride for anything. The end.